Today, I'm going to look at some of the arcade games that were released for the Atari 2600. Because the Atari 2600 was such a primitive system, its greatest strength was trying to get arcade games into the home. Sometimes, games would translate very well to the system. Other times, not so much. Let's take a closer look and see what games are really good for the system and which other ones could be left in the dust. And let's start with my favorite game on the 2600, Missile Command. Now, let's just get this out of the way. None of these Atari 2600 ports are going to look anywhere near as good as the arcade versions. It's just not possible. But the truth is, graphics don't make a game. As we go through this, I will be pointing out obvious differences in the gameplay. But I'm going to leave graphics alone. That way I don't have to mention it for the rest of the video and get too redundant. Anyways, this is Missile Command. And as you can see, it's a very simple game. You take control of your missiles and you gotta shoot down other missiles that are coming in from, I don't know, Russia or Cuba or something like that. You gotta defend your 6 cities, and once your cities are all gone, that's when the game is over. Now, in the arcade version, there were 3 different cannons, and you would control this game with a trackball, which if you don't know what a trackball is, you know those like golf games you sometimes see at restaurants, and it has that weird ball in the middle that you use to control your shot? That's a trackball. It gave you a lot of precision. Now, obviously, the 2600, first of all, it doesn't have 3 buttons, it only has 1. It just consolidated all of your bases into the center with 1 cannon, and you're just able to use that. This game translates really well to the 2600. It's a lot of fun, and it gets fucking hard real quick. You would probably think that the lack of extra precision would be a problem, but it's not a problem in this game. Atari really knew their system well, so they were able to make compromises in the right spots and not lose a whole lot of gameplay. Now, you do miss some enemies in this game compared to the arcade version, but at the end of the day, it's still a great game, and I highly recommend picking it up and playing it for a few minutes. Next up is Asteroids. You're a spaceship stuck in an asteroid belt, and you gotta shoot all the asteroids. That's the game. This is one of those games you can't really say a whole lot about because this translated perfectly fine onto the 2600. The arcade version used vector graphics, but the Atari 2600 version obviously uses pixels. That's really the only difference that I can think of. Good game. Moving on. Next is Millipede. Now, there was another game that had a similar title to this called Centipede. This is another game that used a trackball, just like Missile Command. Now, I kind of go back and forth on how I feel about Millipede over Centipede. I've never played the arcade machine of Millipede, but I have played it in various arcade collections, whereas the Centipede machine I have played and spent a lot of time on. The cool thing about Centipede is that it used a trackball just like Missile Command, so you get that extra layer of precision. In a game like Missile Command, you can lose a little bit of precision and be okay, but that extra layer of precision is almost required in a game like Millipede, because you might need to get into those tight spaces, and it can be really difficult. But the 2600 version of Millipede is pretty good. I've played this a lot, it's a lot of fun. It also feels like they threw in every single Atari sound effect that they could find into this game. One of the big differences of Millipede and Centipede is the difficulty. Millipede is a much harder game, whether it's the arcade version or the home console versions. Yeah, Millipede. It's a great time, there's a lot going on, and it's a ton of fun. Next up is Battlezone. And man, this is pretty cool. A first-person perspective on the video computer system. This is one of those games that was released in the arcades, and it had vector-based graphics. You would also have to look through like a viewfinder or a periscope sort of thing. It was really cool. This game translates so well to the 2600. It controls great, it sounds great, it's so easy to pick up and play. It's nice to be able to play a game that is so straightforward and simple. You don't need to level up your character to 100 just to beat a game. It's just roll in your tank and kill everything on screen. Perfect. That's all you need to make a good game. Well, that does it for some of the Atari arcade games that translated. Let's look at some other companies and see how well their games translated. Here's a great game. It's called Berserk. This is one of my favorite games on the 2600. Super simple to understand and play. You run in a direction and you shoot. You gotta shoot every robot, or at least get all the ones you can, and move on to the next maze. What's really cool is that the arcade version of this game had voices.
Intruder alert, intruder alert. The humanoid must not escape.
Now, the voices are definitely a novelty. They're not required to enjoy the game, but that is a major difference with the 2600. Graphically, it looks great. The controls super fucking smooth, and it's just fun to shoot robots. Every now and again, you'll see a orange ball come onto the screen. That's Evil Otto. Basically, he acts as like a timer. If you stick around on screen for too long, Evil Otto will show up and crush you. You can play without Evil Otto through variations, but frankly, I think it makes it a lot more fun and challenging when you play with Evil Otto on. Oh yeah, I didn't mention variations. So every Atari game was programmed with several different variations built into it. That way you could pick and choose a slightly different way on how to play a game if you like. I will also say that Evil Otto being in the game makes it a lot more closer to the arcade original, which is perfect for it. Frogger. Everybody loves Frogger. This is one of the best games ever made, and it translates very well to the 2600. I mean, look at it. Everything you need to see is crystal clear. You don't need to read an instruction manual on how to play this. It's just doing everything right. This is how an Atari game should be. I think you can make an argument that this is the best translation from arcade to home console, at least for the Atari. The only thing that's missing is the background music during the gameplay, but it's such a minimal loss for an otherwise great experience. Man, what kind of frog gets killed by water? Ooh, next we got a good one, ladies and gentlemen. This is Defender. Now, I have an interesting history with Defender. I have played the arcade version, but I actually prefer either home ports or just like ports you would find on like the Xbox compared to playing the arcade cabinet. Because in the arcade cabinet, there's a whole button to turn your ship around. It makes the game extremely challenging. I mean, the game's already hard with a normal D-pad. So, thankfully you don't have to do that in home versions of the game. But how's the Atari version? Well, it almost feels like a different game. As you look on screen here, you can see that we have a city landscape as opposed to mountains. Now, most of the enemies that you remember from Defender are here, but they don't act the way they should. The pods, for example, are nowhere near as much of a menace in this version as they are in the arcade game. Even the mutants aren't that much of a problem compared to the arcade version. This is probably the easiest version of Defender that I've ever played. But that doesn't make it bad. In fact, sometimes having a lengthy game of Defender is a lot of fun. I find it funny how every time you shoot, your spaceship completely disappears. I will say there is a lot of flickering going on in this game, but it's still a lot of fun to play. I feel like I've been saying this a lot, but it's just the truth. Another one of my favorite games is Joust. The arcade version of Joust is probably in my top 5 arcade games ever made. Not counting fighting games. Joust is what I would call like a perfect game. You're riding on a bird, you gotta flap your wings and land on top of the other bird's knights. You don't want to use your lance, that would make too much sense. You gotta actually land on top of them with your huge bird. Now, what's interesting about the 2600 version of this game is that when you kill a knight, the eggs don't settle. They float around on the screen. It makes it a very interesting and different version of Joust. You'll also notice there's no spawners. So everything like appears on the side of the screen. Most things made it here, like the pterodactyl, but no lava hand. That's kind of a shame, because I always really liked it. This is not a great version of Joust, by all means, but this is definitely one of the most interesting versions of Joust that I've played. But I will always prefer the arcade version over this. Oh boy, next up is Pac-Man for the Atari. Now, Pac-Man is one of the most iconic video games ever. We've all played Pac-Man. I've played it. You've played it. We all know what it sounds like. We all know what it looks like, right? Well, here's Pac-Man for the 2600. Yeah, this looks fucking terrible. I mean, where do I even start? The sound effects suck ass. You can barely tell who the ghosts are. And speaking of the ghosts, they don't behave anything like they do in the arcade. In fact, they all feel very random with their AI. In the arcade version, each ghost has a specific AI programmed into it. So each ghost acts a little bit different from each other. But in the 2600 version, it feels like everything is just random. I don't even think this game is working right. Because when you collect a power pellet, I swear sometimes the ghosts just don't run away from you. So this is really not a good version of Pac-Man. I mean, he can't even look up and down, for God's sakes. He can only look right and left. Oh man, I hope they didn't screw up Ms. Pac-Man. This is such an amazing game. Please don't tell me they fucked it up. Please don't. Oh, this is pretty good. Yeah, for a home console, this is a good version of Ms. Pac-Man. The ghosts behave much more accurately to the arcade original. The fruit does, well, look like fruit. The game looks better, it sounds better. Ms. Pac-Man can actually face up and down properly. It even has some of the other mazes. Wow, talk about a huge improvement. If only Pac-Man had gotten something similar to this. But hey, you win some, you lose some, I guess. How about Mario Brothers? This is okay too. It looks super primitive, but you know what? It's still a decent version of Mario Brothers. You don't have the physics here like you do with the arcade version, so you can't bounce an enemy back. But since the game is so fast, it doesn't really feel like that matters all that much. I mean, I feel like you can just jump twice like almost instantaneously. You also get a good amount of the enemies from the arcade version in this version. Also, doesn't anybody else think it's weird that there's a Nintendo game that's not on a Nintendo system? That's kind of strange. They don't do that anymore. It's a good version of Mario Brothers. So how does Donkey Kong look? Oh. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, Donkey Kong did not translate too well to the 2600. On top of, well, the game kind of looks like shit, we're missing 2 of the 4 levels from the arcade version. That sucks, man. Even if we were only missing 1, I could make do with that, but the fact that we're missing 2 additional levels from the arcade version is really rough. I also find it funny that depending on the way you're facing, Donkey Kong moves a certain way. I always found that kind of amusing with this game. Not a great version, pass on this one. Space Invaders. Yep. This translated perfectly fine onto the 2600. This is probably the version of Space Invaders that most people think of. What can I say? It's a great game. You get some really cool variations in here too, like here's a mode where all the aliens are invisible and the cover moves back and forth. Kind of interesting. Dig Dug. Now this is a really good version of Dig Dug. Yes, there's much better versions that were even on other home consoles at the time, but this is a good version of Dig Dug for the Atari. It sounds pretty good, looks pretty good. I mean, even the animation on Dig Dug's walk cycle looks good. Everything that you'd expect from the arcade version would be here. Maybe not everything, but for the most part, this game also translates really well to the 2600. Next up is Q*bert. This is also a fantastic version on the 2600. Everything that you would expect there to be in Q*bert is here. The one part of this game that is objectively worse than the arcade is you don't actually see movement on the enemies. So sometimes it can be a little hard to tell on where they're gonna jump or anything like that. But this is Q*bert. And one thing I really like about Q*bert is that every time he dies, he swears. There's a little bit of Q*bert in us all. Great game, great arcade game, heavily underrated. This game does not get the attention that Pac-Man or Dig Dug gets, but if you ever find this machine or just run across this cartridge, play it please, because it's such a great arcade game that people really don't talk about. Well, that wraps up this video. Sometimes the Atari 2600 really could do arcade games justice, and other times not so much. It really did depend on who was making the game and how complex the arcade version was. But if you make compromises in the right spots, I think almost any game can be converted properly. What were some of your favorite arcade games on the 2600? Let me know down in the comments. I'll see you next time.